The eager rabbit jumped over the lazy log. The eager rabbit jumped over the lazy log. Now that I have finished my vocal warm-ups, I have been once again granted the gift of gab and can continue my devlog. In the last part, I worked on ledge movement systems again, and ledge jumping systems again, and in this part, I work on ledge movement systems again, and ledge jump systems again, and also the logic for underwater movement. It's primarily the underwater movement, but I also added the ledge jump thing that I'm going to talk about now. The first thing I did was work on the ledge jump system. This is, if you saw the last devlog, the system where you would press a button and you would jump to a ledge in that direction. I removed that system because it was a little bit janky. I felt like it was too difficult to actually organically search for a ledge. It seemed like you were mostly jumping to ledges that you weren't aiming for, or you were going too far, or not far enough, and it was a very complicated system for what I wanted to be a very simple movement pattern along the ledge. So I wanted to rework that, so instead of jumping to different ledges, you're just jumping quickly to the ledge you are currently on. So I will go over how it works in game, how it's coded, the animations for it, and the logic behind these systems. In no particular order. I'll do those out of order. So the way this works is you press jump while you are on a ledge. This will either pull you up if you're not pressing an input direction, or if you're pressing either left or right to any degree, you will jump in that direction for a set amount. This is not actually a jump, but I'll get onto that when I talk about the coding. It essentially moves you very quickly along the ledge, and then there is a short cooldown period where you cannot move after the ledge. This is traded off by how quickly you can move along the ledge. So it would be like the roll in a Link game, where you can kind of roll to get a faster movement speed, but the downside in this scenario would be that you would have a cooldown to this and you wouldn't be able to move afterwards. It is technically faster if you're on a ledge and you just press jump a bunch of times on the ledge, but it doesn't look as good, so I don't imagine most players doing this. Probably. However, as I mentioned, this is not actually a jump. It's not a jump in the way that you would organically program a jump system, where you would have the character moving in the space using physics and geometry. What is actually happening here is the player is just moving along the ledge using the ledge movement logic and scripting, as in, whereas the ledge go to ledge points keep moving, but they are having their controls hijacked by the jump scripting. Essentially, you press jump, we then move into the ledge jump system, and then as we are in this system, we are locked into this velocity we have held into. So for example, if we held right, we'd be locked into the velocity of holding right. We will then add a boosted speed for the ledge jump speed. We'll then move to this speed after a delayed time, and then after the actual time, stop moving. I think that's right. There's a delay, we start moving to this very quick speed, then after that speed we slow down. This has more of an organic sort of jump pulse to it, so very slow, very quick, a little bit of slowdown from grabbing onto the ledge and then stopping completely, and then back to regular momentum of moving along a ledge. If you're wondering why I coded it this way and not making a new system for ledge jump movements that would be more physics based or collision based and organic, the answer would be it was easier. It was significantly easier just to rework or copy most of the scripting from the initial code section, and then just rework a couple values, have some sticky velocity, and then make it so it's based on the timers that I set up as floats. It's a really easy system. In terms of the actual animation for this, it was also pretty easy. Essentially, I had it so that the animation plays from your ledge vault idle. We then lerp into this. We don't lerp into this, we blend into this. I confuse my terms very often. We blend into this animation for 0.1 frame, 0.1 second. During this time there is a very brief pulling up sort of animation that is playing in the animation. This is just to give your character the impression of they are preparing to do a jump. Then we very quickly have the animation of them moving in a direction. As they are playing this animation, we actually move the character in this time point of the movement script, so they move along with this motion. As they hit the ledge, they very quickly go into an aftershock sort of pose, where they are going in the opposite direction of what they hit. This is to convey the momentum of the ledge jump, and then they ease back into their normal pose. As this is happening, we then blend back into the normal ledge movements, so that they will either blend into the ledge hang with the legs loose, or the ledge grapple with the legs on the wall. And that's how I made the ledge jumping. If you want a shorter version of this entire section, the way ledge jumping works is you move quickly along the ledge and then you stop moving quickly and then you can start moving again. In terms of actual gameplay, zero purpose whatsoever. You just move slightly faster with a cost of moving slower. I think a net gain of maybe 0.1 frames saved. It's a pretty pointless system, but it looks funky and I like it. I then added water movement to the game. Because my controller must do everything. I thought about adding water movement once, and now I'm obsessed with adding it, and it's on my list of things to add, and I can't sleep at night unless that list is done. I haven't slept in 12 months. So let's go over how it works. The way water movement works is you hit the water and you swim across the surface. I love its simplicity. That's pretty much it. There is actually some complexity to the water movement. You essentially are in the water, you have significantly less control over your character's movements, there is less acceleration and deceleration. Those values are changed as you're in the water. Are they faster than slower than the ground? Who's to say, because I didn't make a note of if they're better or worse than the... I'm going to take a stab in the dark and say that logically I programmed water acceleration to be faster than on-ground acceleration because that logically makes sense. But also this is me, so I probably just put a bunch of numbers in and said, well, that looks fun, that plays well, I'll work with that, and acceleration is different in the water. Deceleration is different in the water. You have a lot more momentum in the water as well, so if you are going quickly swimming and then you stop, you're going to carry on your trajectory for a while until you stop normally. And as you're in the water, you have to actually build up speed. This is essentially if you're in the water and you're paddling and you're maintaining your weight so you don't sink down. It takes a while to actually get going and build speed in water. So essentially water is a lot faster than being on the ground. You can swim actually faster than your base movement speed, but you have to actually build up to that speed. Once you enter the water from a run, you maintain your speed and momentum, but you have less control, like you are actually swimming. Essentially I was trying to replicate the notion of really swimming in the water. Now I will talk about how collision checks work in the water, and this is an interesting section because there is no collision with the water. The player does not check for collision where if there is water to trigger if they are on the water or not. It is actually done by the water checking if there is a player nearby. Actually I guess that's technically a collision check. There is one collision check. I told a bold-faced lie but a moment ago, but there is no actual more collision checks. When the player enters the hitbox of the water, it has an on-trigger enter system, so the player is now told that there is a water nearby, and we feed a water control script to the player, which is assigned to this plane of water? Cube of water? Whatever the water section is then fed to the player. The player looks at this script and then reads what the water level of the water is. For example, if the water is at height 0, it would be 0. The water is at y 0. When the player is in proximity to this water collider, they will check for water collision. Once the player is outside of the water collider hitbox, they will no longer check for any water collision in their movement functions. The way water collision is checked is instead of having an overlap sphere or a raycast or something to detect the water, we instead look at the water's Y height, we see what our Y height is, we compare the two. If we are below the water level, then we will be put into the water. If we are above the water level, we will not be in the water anymore. It's actually pretty easy and simple. I was surprised it worked this well as well. Usually there was a lot more jank to this sort of collision system, but it's pretty much, is the player below the water level? They're in the water. Make them be in the water. The only further complexity added to this is if the player is underwater, if they are swimming underwater and they go upwards, they surface from the water, the player will then look to see if the player was underwater and they are either at the water level or above the water level, and if they are, we will trigger back into being on the water surface instead of underwater, because being underwater and on the player's water surface is two completely different states because they work differently in their functionality. I probably should have explained how that works now. I'm going to explain how underwater movement works now, but essentially if you're underwater and you go above water, you are made to be above water. Now that I've talked about water movement swimming, I will now talk about water movement swimming, but under the water. That is to say, underwater movements. So the way you can enter underwater is through two separate instances. The first being, if you're on the water surface and you press the crouch key, you will dive underwater. This plays a pretty good diving animation that I'm quite proud of and we'll talk about later. The second way that you can enter underwater is if you go from the in-air state to the underwater state while you have a gravity value of less than -3. I think. Essentially, if you're going down with enough velocity, as in you're moving down quickly, you will pierce the top layer of the water and you will go straight into the water. Essentially, moving down quick, going to water sink. Once you are under the water, you can control your character in the same way you can above the water. You use the little movement stick to move them forward or backwards or left or right. Have I explained that that's how you move in water? The way you move in water is the same way you move on land, it's just less control. So you'd press the control movement stick and you'd move around in water in the exact same way you'd move on land. Which I know doesn't really mean much because you haven't played the game, but imagine a third person movement. I'm getting off track. You can move underwater the same way you can above the water, only you now have the option to move up and down. So you can press space to swim upwards, and you can hold it to continue to swim upwards because it's not a press. It's a hold. If you're holding space, you move upwards, or you can hold crouch to swim downwards. I felt this was the best way to implement a water movement system. The other option I had was to implement something like the sort of movement you would see in a flying game, where as soon as you enter the underwater, the camera sticks to behind the player and the character will swim forward if you're holding space, and then pressing down on the control stick would make them swim upwards, pressing up would make them swim downwards, and then left and right would tilt left and right with your movements, essentially making the player control a bit more like a vehicle in underwater sections. I think this would be good to have sort of a bit more momentum with the jumping out of water, which we'll get onto, but I also feel like it would be a little bit difficult to control your character like this if you're constantly switching between a regular movement system and then a completely different movement input system, which I have mentioned in a previous devlog about vehicles. I would probably add a little thing on the screen that says to go watch that video to see what I'm talking about, but I forget to make those, so I made a video on vehicles, and you should check it out if you want to see what I'm talking about. Essentially, I don't want to always have the player switching back and forth between different control schemes. I don't want a completely different control scheme while the player is underwater, which I will also talk about in a moment. But I want the underwater movement to control exactly as you would imagine it if you were just playing on the ground. Let's say the player's running around on the ground surface of the game, and then they fall into the water, you will be able to control the character exactly as you imagine it, which is what I was aiming for with this movement scheme. For the underwater movements, once you get to the top of the water surface, you will go onto the water surface layer again, and you can make your way to the edge of the water surface to get out. Every time I see the word water, I always read it as water with 2 W's, and it always reminds me of Eridan from Homestuck, how he would say his words with 2 W's. One time somebody told me that I sound like they imagine Eridan from Homestuck would sound if they had an audible voice, and it is to this day the most insulting thing I have ever been told in my entire life. Let's talk about water movement some more. So there isn't actually a full animation for being on the surface of the water and idling because I was too lazy to make one. I didn't feel like it, so I didn't make one yet. But you may be able to tell that the character is actually moving up and down while they're on the water surface. How am I doing this? Well, pretty easily. I just have a float value attached to the player that will keep them at an offset from the water surface, but then they will add a certain amount to it every so often, going upwards until it reaches 0.1 value, and then going downwards until it reaches -1 value. This is to simulate the character bobbing up and down on the surface of the water. If you are treading water on the surface of water, let's see how many times I can say water in this devlog. Let's see how many times I can say water correctly. It simulates the character treading water and just bobbing with the waves of the water. Very simple, just to have some nice little visual feedback of the player. So the animations for this, as I had mentioned, are pretty good. We have a few different swimming animations I have shown up in previous devlogs. We have the regular, I'm not sure what the swimming pose is called, the one where you have your arms above your head, the quick swimming that they do at the Olympics, that sort of animation. We have a breaststroke animation, which I have just recently made, and I'm pretty excited for. The breaststroke animation was made for 2 different reasons I will get onto in a moment, but also because I think it looks cool. Here's a fun little hobby you can do. If you're an animator, try animating a breaststroke animation. It's pretty fun. It's a pretty fun thing to do. No joke there, it's just a fun little exercise, I guess. We then have a idling animation for this, and then we have 2 additive animations, which are just kind of overlays on some bones to move them around certain ways if you don't know what those are, for swimming up and swimming down. So you may notice I don't have a swimming up animation, and I don't have a swimming down animation. Oh wait, I do. I don't have an animation for swimming forwards and up. Does this make sense? Do you know what I'm talking about? Does anyone know how I'm talking about? If you're swimming forward at full force and you're holding the spacebar to go upwards, you're going to be going up and diagonally. But I don't have a specific animation for the player going up and diagonal. I instead have an overlay for if you are doing this, the character will automatically tilt upwards and diagonal with this movement. You know, I should script these so I can explain things better. I then have 2 unique animations for swimming upwards and swimming downwards. But only if you're swimming upwards and swimming downwards. If you're swimming upwards and forwards, it plays the swim upwards and forwards animation. You know what? You can see it happening. I don't have to explain it. I made some swimming animations. They were fun. I recommend doing it if you're an animator, or if you're not an animator. I mean, you can have fun drawing even if it's not a profession. And full stop. I'm going to stop talking about animations now. I don't have anything else to say. Oops, I do. I also made an animation for diving into the water. This is pretty cool, actually. It goes from the in-air pose straight downwards as like a is it called a dolphin dive? A dolphin dive into the water, and then readjust to your water underwater pose. I then have another animation for diving out of the water. This is your player going straight up into a nice little pencil upwards pose, sure, and a pencil upwards pose, and then lerping to a different pose based on the velocity of the gravity, and then going back into the water to land into the water. I really like how these look. When I had these initially added, I went from the water surface to jumping out of the water to diving back into the water over and over again, and I think it looked very cool. And that's it for animations. For real this time. As I mentioned 12 seconds ago in that other section about water animations, I added water jumping. This is very simple. If you're on the surface of the water, you will jump up and out of the water. If you are moving forward in this point, you will jump up and out of the water and also have some forward force to your movement. Is this realistic? Absolutely not. But there needs to be a system for the player to easily get out of water, even if it's not a realistic system. For realistic physics, even though my game doesn't have realistic physics, so I'm not sure why I need to point that out. This is just a way for the player to be able to have a bit more movement while they're in water, that is similar to their on-ground movements, but it's very simply used the same jump code as everything else I do does. I also think it looks nice. I shall now talk about game design for a really long time. That's the real reason I made this video. I just wanted to talk about underwater movement systems, but not the ones I've made, just them in general. I feel like I've always had this odd fascination with underwater and water movement systems in videos games, but I also think most of them aren't good. I think the issue is, personally speaking, that generally if a game is to add an underwater physics system or an underwater movement system, or even a water movement system, I don't know why I specified underwater, I guess I misspoke on that one, it always subtracts from the actual game's movements and is generally just regarded as this slow and clunkier way of moving around spaces, and I didn't really want something like that in my game. I think that's why I deliberately made underwater movement feel very fast, and is in actuality faster than the player's on-ground movement, as you could tell by the speedometer in the UI's visuals. I know it's the classic gamer thing to not like underwater sections in video games, but I really feel like that's not a good way to view game design. I think underwater sections have a lot of potential. It's essentially a section where you have free reign to move in the upwards and downwards axis along with the other movement axes. You can do a whole lot with that. You can make a lot of fun movement and fun momentum. You can design your character to swim like a dolphin when they're underwater and have like a cool movement system of breaching the water surface or things of that nature. I don't know why I'm saying this in a devlog where I didn't do that, and I made an expressively more boring version of underwater movement, but you get my points, hopefully. I just feel like underwater sections, there's a lot of potential there, and I feel like a lot of games kind of do it wrong. The easy way to make a water movement is just to make it so your player jumps higher underwater, they sink to the bottom of the water surface, and they move slower. But that's boring. I don't like that. So what I wanted to encompass with my design for an underwater system, or the water system in general, is to have a movement system and a movement state system that plays very similar to the regular on-ground movement, but has its own unique qualities. So essentially, if you're viewing this from a momentum standpoint, let's say you're running forward, there's a water surface in front of you, and then there's ground on the other side. You run forward, you enter the water surface, you maintain your velocity, you carry on swimming across the water surface, and you get out on the other edge of the water. Now, from a pure design perspective, you've essentially gone from point A to point B to point C, but you haven't really changed anything about the way you're playing the game. You've just moved across the surface, you've moved across a different surface, you've moved across the same surface as the beginning surface again. You've got back to it. There isn't any unnecessary slowdown, unnecessary change in physics. You're basically playing the same way the whole time. Now, my underwater section does have some different changes in the movement, as in you have less control to sort of make it more unique to the ground states and also be more fun. And then when you're underwater, you have more control over your Y height. But aside from that, it's pretty much playing the exact same as the regular ground movement, which I suppose is the boring answer, but at least it's not the unfun answer. I would like to make more movement with the water in the future. Like I mentioned before, with the player controlling like a dolphin. Now that I said that, like 2 minutes ago, I now really want to do it. I really want to change the entirety of the water system so you play from a camera behind the player and you move them like a little plane, and you can pop in and out of the water like a dolphin. Man, that would be cool. Let's disregard this entire Devlog and ditch what I've done so far and make a dolphin system. Let's make a dolphin game. Oh, that would be fun. Oh, and to answer the question I posed to myself at the beginning of this section, why add water sections to games? Why not? It's another thing I can add. Finally, as shown off in every section of this video so far, I added an underwater camera. So the camera can change based on how it looks if you're underwater. Why add this? Fairly obvious. If you're not familiar with how underwater sections in games usually work, visually speaking, the water is just a flat plane on the top of where the water is, and then nothing else is underwater. The rest are just visual camera effects and trickery. So in the same way that the player detects when there is water, with the water having a trigger enter system, the camera has the same system, but in this sense we detected the camera is underwater. If the camera is underwater, we turn on our camera water effects. If the camera was underwater and is now not underwater, we turn off these effects. What are these effects? I'm glad you asked. The first one is a blue tint. This is the easiest of the effects. Hold on to your seat, we're going to get needlessly complicated after this. The second one is a color reduction script. This is sort of difficult to explain audibly, but essentially if you had a wide array of colors, we're shortening them down so only a few colors are shown visually on the camera. If you were to try and visualize this, maybe pay attention to the player's clothing where it is blended very smoothly. When we go underwater and the camera goes underwater, this blending is more harsh and more blocky. So essentially we have less detail on surfaces, things look a bit more blocky, a bit more shaded in a way that looks blocky. Things are shaded with less color depth, essentially. This doesn't really make much sense, but I think it gives a nice little visual indication of being underwater. Just that things are less detailed, things are in this nice little like hazy visual for you being underwater. I think it works, and I'm not listening to feedback, so don't tell me about it. For this one section, the rest you can feedback. Then the final effect, really simple, it's a little wiggly effect that plays on the animation, not on the animation, on the render layer. On the render layer of the camera. This just gives like a wiggly wave to the surface. It's very subtle. Maybe pay attention to a straight line when we're underwater, or some blocky visual to get this effect. Just wobbly, because water is wobbly. This is very simple to explain as a visual standpoint. You're underwater, water has waves, the screen gets a little bit wavy. It looks underwater. I'm pretty proud of these visual effects. I think it's a good way to make the character look like they are underwater and the camera look like they are underwater without applying any actual physical visuals to the space. Just a couple of post-processing effects. And now we are finished with Devlog. This was a fun week of development, as all weeks of development are, because everything is fun when you get to spend your time coding. While I have very little view that I'm going to include a whole lot of water levels and water sections in whatever this game is, it is nice to have the option available to me if I would like to add more water systems to the game. Maybe a submarine. If you have any suggestions for what you would like to see in the game, you could leave it in a comment below. And let me know in the comments below which boss monster from the popular videos game Bloodborne you would most likely to give a smooch to. My answer would be Ebrietta's, Daughter of the Cosmos. I think she has a cute little face. I want to smush my face in her little weird tentacle sack thing. It would be so fun. I probably would have gone with Maria, but she's a corpse, and that's pretty creepy.